Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Got a couple super small pistols on the table. I've got the Smith & Wesson M&P Bodyguard 380, and I've got the original LCP from Ruger, both chambered in 380. Please don't forget to check out our website. Go to our affiliates page. You'll find discount codes for things like Mantis Axe and Core belts, linked to that cool little bore light that we use for lighting up the barrels. Use those links. It will often save you money, never will cost you any additional money, and helps the channel. And please consider supporting the channel on Player, formerly Utreon, where we can do some types of videos that are no longer allowed on YouTube. Now, when I mention original on the LCP, they went through a number of generations of the LCP, making revisions of it, and just still called it the LCP. They didn't change the name or anything. So this isn't one of the very originals. This is one of the later revisions of what would be just the basic LCP. And you'll notice the thing is tiny. I can palm it very easily, even with the pinky mag in it. I can pretty much palm this gun. And that's really what these are all about. Super small, super light, tiny. This is a real deep conceal gun. You could put this into any kind of off-body carry, fanny pack, something like that. An ankle gun, you wouldn't even notice it was there. It does come with some compromises, just like the Bodyguard does come with some compromises. Predominantly, the compromises are the capacity. Both of these hold 6 rounds. The LCP does have a 7-round magazine available, but that seems kind of paltry when you look at some of the Micro 9s that are out now. But even those, even the smaller ones of those, are much bigger than this. And in some use cases, size really does matter. You really do need the smallest thing you can get. And I can palm this one as well, even though this is a hair bigger in all but one dimension than the LCP. So, a couple questions, might as well get them out of the way right up at the beginning. Why am I comparing the LCP instead of the LCP2 or the LCP Max? Well, the LCP is still in production. Surprisingly, as old as it is, the design is, it's still in production. I've got an LCP2 here, and it's basically the same footprint, just restyled. It's got an improved trigger over the LCP by a little bit, but these are no longer on their website. They're no longer producing them. So these are kind of won't be available after a while once they're used up. It is still available in 22 LR, but not as a 380 or centerfire cartridge. And as far as the LCP Max, I got one of them right here, it's bigger. The Max does actually come into play. Now you can get 10 or 12 rounds depending on which magazine you put in it. There is a flush magazine that holds 10, but it is bigger. It does have a much nicer trigger, but there's a limitation to it, and that is reliability. And again, I can palm this. Now, of course, it's got the extended magazine, so it's about equal to that pinky extender on the other one. So this will work well from a footprint standpoint, but it is a little thicker, a little longer, just a little more. For example, I put them all side by side, and you can see the LCP Max is definitely more portly than the rest of them. But the biggest problem I've got with the LCP Max is reliability issues with the magazines. This magazine doesn't lock back. Now, they did send replacement magazines, and some of the replacements did work well, some didn't. So this hasn't reached the reliability threshold I would want. So I'm going to set that aside. And by the way, those have an MSRP of $479, and they're selling around $360. The LCP2, if you can find one, which is this little guy here, has the same $479 MSRP, and they're selling around $285. So both of them are still, right now, still available. Of the choices, if you don't like the LCP and you're wanting something newer with a little bit better trigger, I would go the LCP2 because of the reliability factor. So now back to the two guns that this is a very equal comparison. These two fit exactly the same mold if you don't consider the LCP Max and the LCP2. If you're looking for the very tiniest thing, kind of here you go. The only things I've seen that are smaller than these are those little car P380s. Those are very tiny, and they're good guns, but they're a little more pricey to get the P-Series, which is what you would want. So let's talk about what I do have sitting here on the table. Let's start with the LCP. It's got a reasonably light slide to rack. It is small, though, so there's not a lot to get hold of, but it racks relatively smoothly. You should, unless you have very weak hands, be able to operate the slide on this. It's a 2-finger grip, even with the pinky extender. With the flush mag, it's kind of like a 1 3/4 grip, and with the pinky extender, it's 2 fingers. I got large hands, not super huge hands, but not small either. and my palm just it kind of dwarfs the grip of it. But these are relatively easy to shoot well, with one exception. The sights are hideous. I have to kind of zoom in on the camera and find the right spot on the other gun, or push it out of the way to show a gap so that you can actually see the front sight. In practice, these sights basically disappear. Now, a lot of times you'll hear people say, yeah, it's a belly gun, you don't need sights. If this is the gun you're carrying, then this is the gun you're going to use in whatever the situation is. You aren't going to have an opportunity to say, oh, hold on a second, I don't have the right gun for this situation, let me go get it, I'll be back. You're going to use what you got. I prefer whatever I've got to have at least reasonably functional sights, and these sights don't meet that. Pretty much if you can't point shoot this, you're going to have a hard time shooting it accurately. Mechanically, it's accurate, but the sights do not lend themselves to shooting well. The texture sits in your hand well. It's got a nice beaver tail. You're kind of well below the slide. You're unlikely to get slide bit. It has a slide stop, slide release that's a little difficult to use because it's really flush. Does not have an external safety. And let's talk about the trigger. It is a double action only trigger, and it was relatively light, relatively smooth, and reasonably short. As you would expect, it's all the way out for the reset and a little bit vague, a little bit of take up to get back on it, and actually I didn't let it go out far enough. I got a false reset. So don't plan to use a reset on these. Plan to let them out all the way every time, and you notice the trigger is dead. It does require it to cycle to reset the trigger. So there is no second strike capability on it. The trigger's decent. For a gun in this category, it's not an awesome trigger, but it is a decent trigger. And I will point out that the LCP2 and the LCP Max have slightly better triggers, but they're still the same in that there is no double strike capability. The mechanism of this just doesn't lend towards that. No ambi features and no external safety, but small, which is really what this is all about. Now I'll move on to the Bodyguard. Relatively light slide. It's actually slightly lighter than the LCP, and kind of definitely notchy. You feel the different steps, but it's really easy to do. And both of these have decent serrations, rear only. The fish scale on the Smith & Wesson is kind of their classic, and then the kind of normal slots you see on a lot of guns these days on the Ruger. Does have a thumb safety available. Slide stop, slide release is a little more easy to get to. Sights are not much better. They're a little more pronounced. They kind of stand out a little bit more, but they're still blackout. They're still difficult to see, and you have the same problems with the sights on this that you're going to have on the sights with the LCP, is that they're not really useful for aiming, because especially if you're in a hurry. The grip on this, still a 2-finger grip with the flush mag. It's got a little bit of pinky grooves. On a gun like this, I would almost prefer they don't. They don't fit my hand perfect. They don't hurt or anything, but they're not optimally positioned. So this would be better with a straight front. The texture is not sandpapery. It doesn't really abrade you or anything, but it's enough to keep the gun in your hand. And like the LCP, it's got a decent beaver tail, not quite as pronounced, but you're still unlikely to get slide bit by this unless you have huge hands that are going to kind of puff up over it. And I mentioned the slide is relatively easy to operate. So let's talk about the trigger on this. So I'll give the trigger a pull. A little bit heavier, a little bit longer than the LCP, but not a bad trigger overall, again, considering this style gun. I will point out that the trigger is vastly improved over the original Bodyguard trigger. The original Bodyguard trigger was absolutely hideous. There's your false reset. So same false reset problem. So it's really all the way out to get an actual reset, and then again pull it through. So the triggers on both of these are workable. They're decent. Neither one of them is impressive, but they're not bad. And I will say, if you've handled the original Bodyguard and discarded it because of the trigger, the M&P is worth another look, because it is at least an improved trigger. This does have a Crimson Trace laser available from the factory, so you can get it with a Crimson Trace laser. The original one, there was a screw in the top that held it in, and that screw had a tendency to back out. The one I had, the slide was actually shaving the screw. Other people I personally know, the screw got far enough out before they caught it and jammed the slide. So I would, and the laser lost 0. I don't know if that's all been resolved because I haven't got that version of it. When I decided to give these a retry when they made them an M&P, I avoided the laser version. So kind of look around, use with caution if you choose to go that version. As far as usability, you'll notice I had to push the magazine release to put the magazine in. They don't want to kind of, if they're all the way out, they don't always want to slide in. They want to hang up. And to get to the magazine release when you're in a shooting grip is a little bit difficult but doable. It's recessed enough, you kind of have to curl your thumb around and give it a press. On the LCP, it's actually really easy to get to, but at the same time, it sticks out a little bit. You can see it stick up a little bit, and I have heard stories of people having it release in their holster because the holster squeezes. I haven't personally had that happen, but I've heard of that, so I can't necessarily discount that. The LCP, the original LCP, does not lock back. The 2 and the Max do if the magazines are working correctly, and the Bodyguard does lock back. And when you only got 6 rounds, it can kind of be important to know that it's time for a mag change. Other than that, dimensionally, they're very, very close to each other. I'll pop these out. And the M&P, by the way, doesn't, as I mentioned earlier, has no optional mag that I'm currently aware of. So dimensionally, they're very close. If I line them, I'm going to line them up like this on purpose just so you can see the grip height is a little bit different. The Ruger is a little bit smaller. So you can see that height difference. If I can get my hand away. So you can see the height difference. The little lip here is much closer. And of course, once you put a magazine in, depending on whether you got the pinky extender or not, that can matter. But dimensionally, they're within tenths of an inch of each other, with one exception. The Bodyguard is thinner at the top, but it's about the same at the bottom. So if you look at the slide, it looks like the Bodyguard's thinner. The grip puffs out a little bit. But when I talk about those dimensions, they're not going to make a difference. You're down into such a small territory in guns that a tenth of an inch isn't going to make an incrementally significant difference. There is one difference that may make a difference. The Bodyguard weighs 12 ounces, and the Ruger weighs 9.9, or let's round to 10 ounces, so a couple ounce difference. So the Ruger is significantly lighter, and that does carry forward with the LCP2 and the Max. Well, the Max is a little bit heavier because it's bigger, but the LCP2 is similar in weight to the LCP. So on an ankle gun, that extra couple ounces of reciprocating mass might make a difference. Talking about MSRP and what I'm seeing them for, the Bodyguard has an MSRP of $399, and I'm seeing them around the $330-ish territory, up and down depending on where you look. The original LCP has an MSRP of $259, and I'm seeing them around $170, mainly because it's the oldest of the old. There's newer, fancier things out, so of course this is going to get on a price. The LCP2, as I mentioned, if you can find one, they're selling around $285. And the LCP Max, they are current production, and I'm seeing them around $360. But again, I almost would say that the LCP Max hasn't met my reliability standards yet. So I'm not going to necessarily recommend that. The LCP2, if you can find one, has proven to be a good gun. Neither of these have impressive drop safeties. They don't have the inertial toggles on the trigger or some of the internal things. They're internal hammer-fired guns. And the Bodyguard has a drop safe characteristic in that it's not cocked. You're fully cocking and releasing the hammer during the cycle. That does improve the drop safety of the Bodyguard. The LCP is partially cocked, and I have heard of at least one instance of an LCP going off when it was dropped. Somebody I personally know about, but I don't know the background of whether or not the gun was well maintained or anything. So drop safety is less prominent on these than it is on things like Glocks and XDMs that have multiple redundant drop safeties, inertial toggles, etc., etc. So kind of in summary, which one would I choose of the two? The original Bodyguard, absolutely not. The M&P version has vastly improved it. But overall, in this category, what I'm looking for is the lightest, tiniest, smallest thing I can possibly get, potentially inexpensive. I'm going to use this as a backup gun, an ankle gun, something like that. And that's where the LCP or the LCP2, if you can find one, would stand out. So I probably would stick with the LCP series of the two for this purpose. If I'm looking for something with more capacity, more robust, and I'm immediately looking at P365s, Hellcats, and things along those lines, I'm moving up in a size category, and I'm kind of moving out of this entirely. So of the two, my personal preference would be one of the LCPs, but whichever one you pick, whichever fits your hands better, probably will serve you well. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, click that bell up there to be notified if you do. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Player, Rumble. We're pretty much everywhere. And thank you.